With almost 7,000 locations, Pizza Hut is one of the largest pizza chains in the United States, and the incredible brand is currently worth an amazing $8.5 billion. But while most people have heard of Pizza Hut and almost everyone has tried its popular food, not many people know the story about the two brothers who created Pizza Hut without knowing anything about pizza. Dan and Frank Carney were born in 1931 and 1938, respectively, to a family of 12 children in Wichita, Kansas. Their parents owned a small grocery store in town, and while they lived a fairly normal life, the Carney family certainly was not wealthy. When Dan and Frank graduated from high school, they both decided to attend Wichita State University to further their education. Neither of the boys wanted to take over the family grocery store, and when Frank was still at Wichita State, the two decided that they would start their own business in the hopes of making more money than their parents had from the grocery store. The problem was, Dan and Frank didn't have any experience starting their own business, or even working, besides in the grocery store. They had no idea what kind of company they would start. But then, they heard of a new food trend on the East Coast that they thought they could try: pizza. In the 1950s, pizza was not a popular food in the United States. It was being served in small Italian immigrant communities in the Northeast, and while it was slowly becoming more well-known, it still wasn't commonplace. In fact, Frank Carney had only ever eaten pizza once in his life, but the brothers thought that if they could open a pizza restaurant, they would be ahead of the curve. Little did they know, they were about to change the food industry forever. But before they could do that, they needed to open their first restaurant, and it wasn't all smooth sailing. In 1958, Dan and Frank borrowed $600 from their mother and opened a pizza restaurant. The idea was simple. They marketed the pizza to students at Wichita State, where Frank was still a student himself. With the measly $600, they bought secondhand equipment and turned a small hut-shaped bar into a pizza restaurant. Because of the shape of the building and the fact that their small sign could only fit a few letters, they named their restaurant Pizza Hut and got to work. The boys had barely eaten pizza before, let alone ever tried to make it. Luckily, they had a friend who had made pizza before, and 2 weeks later, they were open for business. Pizza Hut originally had an extremely small menu with only 3 types of pizza: cheese, sausage, and pepperoni. And there were only 2 sizes. A small one cost 95 cents, and a large one was $1.50. Unfortunately, the opening day didn't go as planned. The used equipment that they had purchased was faulty, and the oven caught on fire when they turned it on, rendering it useless. In fact, the fire affected the entire restaurant, and the Carney brothers were forced to delay their opening to repaint and purchase new equipment. But luckily, it seemed that the opening day debacle was just one setback. Once they opened the next night, Pizza Hut experienced immediate success. Only 6 months after opening, the brothers opened a second location. And within just 1 year of starting this incredibly risky business, there were 6 Pizza Hut locations in Kansas. There is no doubt that by 1959, only 1 year after Dan and Frank had opened their first restaurant, they were doing very well for themselves. But these brothers didn't want to stop there. In fact, their plan was to make Pizza Hut a nationwide chain. And they did exactly that. Only 7 years later, in 1966, Dan and Frank opened 145 Pizza Hut locations around the United States. By 1969, they opened their first international location in Canada. However, while Pizza Hut was spreading around the globe, there were now other pizza chains that started to jump into the ring. Domino's opened its first restaurant in 1960, and Little Caesars opened its first doors in 1967. Pizza, as Dan and Frank had anticipated, was now one of the most popular foods in the industry, and the boys were going to have to pay attention to ensure they stayed at the top. Dan and Frank decided that in order to keep Pizza Hut as the most popular pizza chain, they would have to invest heavily in marketing. One of the first tactics they chose was to build the now iconic red hut-shaped roof onto every one of their restaurants. That red roof also became the company logo. By 1977, Pizza Hut had become and stayed the most popular pizza restaurant not only in the country, but also in the world, with locations on almost every continent. And it was then that Dan and Frank decided they wanted to cash out. They had created a global empire with over 3,000 locations and hundreds of millions of dollars in sales every year. and they decided to sell it to PepsiCo for $300 million. But just because Pizza Hut was now in the hands of a global company didn't mean they could relax. In fact, by the 1980s, Domino's, Little Caesars, and even Papa John's had stepped up their game and were quickly closing the gap. There were now 4 pizza chains fighting for customers, and essentially a pizza war ensued, as they each fought for the top spot in the industry. Pizza Hut once again invested heavily in marketing. Pizza Hut sponsored the incredibly popular film Back to the Future Part 2 in 1989, released a video game with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle characters, and spent millions on television commercials. In the commercials, celebrities such as Donald Trump, the Monkees, and Rush Limbaugh endorsed Pizza Hut, which at the time was quite a novelty concept. They also started releasing a new menu every 2 months, from barbecue pizzas to veggie pizzas, meat lovers, and so many more new and innovative menu items. Pizza Hut was doing its best to remain the consumer's favorite pizza restaurant. But then Pizza Hut came up with an idea that would not only boost their sales but also change the way people ate pizza forever. They noticed through surveys that many people didn't eat the crust of the pizza, so they decided to make it more appetizing by stuffing it with cheese. The new stuffed crust pizza was a huge hit. In fact, within only 1 year, stuffed crust pizza brought in over $300 million in sales. By 2005, only 10 years after the release of the stuffed crust pizza, there were more than 12,000 stores in 86 countries. Pizza Hut was still on top as the most popular pizza chain on the planet. Throughout the following decade, Pizza Hut didn't rest for a minute. They focused heavily on delivery options for their customers, as well as invoking new and innovative menu items in their locations around the world that suited the tastes of residents there. In the US, they offered a hot dog stuffed pizza crust. In London, England, they put bars in their restaurants. In Hong Kong, they started selling their pizzas in IKEA furniture stores. And they even offered an entire chicken wing menu at many locations called Wing Street. In China, where Pizza Hut is wildly popular, they offer a more fine dining experience in their restaurants with forks, knives, and a more diverse menu with popular Chinese side dishes. There are now more than 2,000 Pizza Hut restaurants in China alone. Throughout the first 2 decades of the 21st century, Pizza Hut continued to invest in marketing, but they also focused heavily on consumer technology. By the end of 2007, customers could order their Pizza Hut on the My Hut ordering site, and even send SMS text messages from TV commercials that would unlock discounts. When Dan and Frank sold Pizza Hut to PepsiCo in 1977, Frank remained the president of the board in 1980, while Dan decided to leave the company altogether. Interestingly, Frank became a franchisee of Papa John's in 1994 and ended up owning 133 locations. In fact, in the late 1990s, Papa John's used Frank for several commercials in which he showed up at a faux Pizza Hut stockholders meeting wearing a Papa John's apron and saying,
"Sorry guys, I found a better pizza."
Frank continued to work with the International Franchise Association even after selling his Papa John's locations and was even the president for a time. He received several accolades from the IFA, including being inducted into the IFA Hall of Fame in 1991 and being named Man of the Year in the Multi-Unit Food Service Organization in 1974. On the other hand, Dan left the industry completely after the sale to PepsiCo. He played recreational polo and lives a comfortable life in his hometown of Wichita, Kansas. Both brothers had set out to do exactly what they planned to do: start a business from the ground up and make it one of the most successful companies on the planet. And to think that they did so without ever having made pizza before is pretty wild. But that is exactly what happened. Although the Carney brothers are no longer involved in the company, Pizza Hut continues to flourish to this day. Under the PepsiCo umbrella, the company is technically owned by Yum Brands. Yum also owns Taco Bell, KFC, and the Habit Burger Grill, and has all the resources they need to continue to market and grow, which is exactly what they are doing. Today, there are more than 17,500 Pizza Hut restaurants around the world, and in 2020, Pizza Hut sales surpassed $5 billion. Only a couple years later, Pizza Hut is now selling around $8.5 billion worth of food annually. And while Domino's, Little Caesars, and even Papa John's aren't far behind, and the pizza war certainly continues, there's no doubt that Pizza Hut is still the most popular pizza chain on the planet. Though we don't know what will happen next, Pizza Hut's marketing strategies have kept them at the top of the industry for almost more than half a century, and it seems as though they will be able to continue to do so for the foreseeable future. Hungry for another fascinating business story? Click on the following video to hear the crazy story about the poor Italian boy who invented Ferrari.